Our News on Terror segment tonight. 0 civilian deaths reported in Syria after the U.S. and France and the U.K. launched joint strikes on 3 chemical weapons facilities outside Damascus on Friday night. President Trump said the attacks, which the Pentagon has confirmed were waged by the Assad regime, are not the actions of a man. They are the crimes of a monster instead. With me now from the Center for Security Policy, Kyle Shideler. Kyle, thanks for joining me.
Liz, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, Kyle, a couple of different avenues that I want to take with this story. First of all, I want to ask you, what happens now? General Mattis was very clear in the immediate aftermath of these strikes that it was a one-shot deal. This was a surgical strike. They were targeted specifically to these 3 areas, these chemical weapons facilities. But what happens, given that it was a limited strike, what happens next?
Well, that's going to very much depend on Bashar Assad and the Syrian army, and to a great extent on the Russians and the Iranians. If they take this warning, this punishment that President Trump has meted out in order to enforce the norms against the use of chemical weapons, which he described as, the acts of a monster, if they choose to accept that, they do not continue to use chemical weapons, then that may be all there is to it. If, however, they double down, and they decide that they're going to use chemical weapons again, I think President Trump will, in all likelihood, have nothing else to do but to escalate.
Right, to continue
these
strikes.
We do know that.
Right. So let me ask you,
there
General
are
Mattis,
remaining facilities in Syria that could be targeted.
Right, and General Mattis himself said that. He said, we chose these 3 because we wanted to mitigate the risk of civilian casualties, but there were others that considered, or that could have been General Dunford, I'm sorry, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was the same press conference as General Mattis. Now, General Mattis was asked very specifically if he was confident that it was Assad that waged these attacks and that it was chemical weapons that were used. And General Mattis said very clearly, he said, yes, I am confident that it was. And the Pentagon now says it was chlorine gas and sarin gas. The 3 areas that were targeted in these strikes, is that a message to Bashar al-Assad? Is that mostly symbolic, or is this truly crippling to his capacity to wage another such attack?
Well, the word that the DoD spokesman used was degrade and crippling, and it was indeed intended to be directly targeting the Syrian chemical weapons program. The targets were a chemical weapons research facility, a chemical weapons storage facility, and a bunker where chemical weapons were believed to be stored. So this was absolutely aimed at the Syrian chemical weapons program. It was not, these were not other targets of opportunity. This was explicitly aimed at the chemical weapons facility and their capability. Now, they do have a wider capability. There are additional chemical weapons targets that we could target if the Syrians choose to ignore President Trump's actions. But I think this was a good start, and we will see where they go from here.
Right, and do you expect any response? The Russians claimed in the aftermath of this, I believe it was a little bit over 100 missiles that were fired from the joint U.S., France, and United Kingdom, those forces, British forces here. It was a little bit over 100 missiles that were fired. The government of Russia essentially said that over 70 of those missiles were shot down. The Pentagon says that that is false, that all the missiles hit their intended targets here. Why haven't we seen a response from Bashar al-Assad, and do you expect one?
I think we will see a response from this axis of powers, particularly by the Russians, but it will be an asymmetric response. That is, they will respond somewhere probably other than Syria in a way that we may not expect. But they are not going to respond, I think, directly against U.S. troops in northern Syria or otherwise alter their plans in Syria.
Right, and a point that I've been making on this show for the past week, even before the strikes happened, is this situation is somewhat, and this sounds very cynical, I know, but it is somewhat of a lose-lose situation. If Bashar al-Assad is in power, he's a brutal dictator, he gasses his own people. If, there were regime change, if we toppled Assad, then it would open up this avenue for these rebels who have jihadist ties to take over. So there's no real ideal solution in Syria. There's no easy answer here. The fault, in my opinion, for this lose-lose situation is Barack Obama, because he had the chance to stop Assad from crossing that red line years ago, and he did not take that chance. The fault here is also the Russians, because they were the ones who were supposed to be the guarantors of ensuring that Bashar al-Assad did not have chemical weapons, that he got rid of his chemical weapons stockpile. They said that he got rid of the stockpile. Clearly, he did not.
That's true. The Russians, of course, were entered into Syria on behalf of Barack Obama, essentially, when Barack Obama made them the guarantor of Syrian chemical weapons removal. And he did that after he failed to enforce his own red line on Syria's use of chemical weapons. President Trump has clearly indicated that he is not going to approach the problem this way. He is going to deal with close Western allies like the United States and like France and enforce these red lines when they're violated. He's also said, however, of course, that he doesn't have a broader interest in intervening with U.S. military force in Syria to topple Assad or take some other action. Now, that's understandable because, as you mentioned, the Syrian rebels are certainly no partners of the United States. But the problem here is we have no broader Syria strategy. It's not really clear what we're attempting to do. We forged decent ties with the Kurds, for example. That may have been an opportunity for us to influence a future Syrian outcome, but that has largely fallen apart due to the actions of our so-called NATO ally Turkey, which has attacked those Kurds that we've been working with, and we've done essentially nothing about it. So we've, especially under the Obama administration, we sat still and we allowed a bunch of bad options to pile up, and we didn't create any good options for ourselves.
Right, and that's why I've been supportive of President Trump's strike, but also this very limited, very surgical strike, because I don't think at this point that it would be a smart strategy in Syria to become more involved, because there isn't that sort of clear-cut solution, that easy solution that just needs the resources to make it happen. It's a lose-lose, and it's a nasty, nasty situation. Kyle, I appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for being here.